Hi, I'm Hall Davidson, former Q board member, currently Director of Global Learning Initiatives with Discovery Education, which is part of Discovery Communications. I'm here interviewing Sir Ken Robinson, who gave the keynote here for about 4,000 people at Q, talking also about his book, Out of Our Minds. What we wanted to talk about now is the ability to assess whether or not creativity is being taught at a school building, in a district, in the state, maybe even in the nation. How would you assess whether or not your teachers, your building superintendents, or your district superintendents, or your building principals are actually moving forward with creativity?
Well, there are various ways of thinking about this, Paul. One is, firstly, you have to define creativity. Because people often say to me, you can't define it or assess it, and actually you can do both. I define it in a very particular way. I define it as the process of having original ideas that have value. Now, the reason I define it that way is that sometimes people think that creativity happens in the abstract. It doesn't. To be creative, you have to do something. It's a practical process. It can be anything. You know, you could be solving a scientific problem. You could be inventing some kind of new device. You could be composing some music. You could be putting together an original analysis in history. You can be creative at anything if you recognize it's about original thinking that has value. And the reason I start this way is that it's not something you just add on to education, like a creativity hour on a Friday. So what you'd be looking for is, firstly, evidence, I think, in creative schools that there's a broad range of opportunities for people to develop original ideas and to explore new thinking. So I always look for a broad curriculum. You can be creative in science, in math, but also in the arts and humanities. So really creative schools know you need a balanced curriculum, not just one that's focused on this or that. Secondly, you can see it in the environment. You can see evidence of students' work, of pupils' work. There was a great school I went to a while ago, right down by the airport in Los Angeles. From the outside, it's like a concrete bunker.
Right.
Once you go inside, it's like an Aladdin's cave of not just students' work, but of work by parents, work by teachers. In the arts, there are paintings and collages on the walls, but there's evidence of scientific experiments going on, lots of group activity. The place is buzzing. You can feel it. It's palpable. And you also see it, I think, in the attitude of students and teachers alike, that there's an excitement and an energy in the school that's really tapping into people's creative spirits and in their imaginations. The other thing, by the way, is none of this is the opposite of raising standards. In my experience, if you really engage students creatively, if you tap into the creative talents of teachers across the curriculum, standards rise because engagement rises. So you'd also see it in terms of conventional output.
So if you're a principal and you're walking through a building and you don't get a sense of that buzz, I mean, you've identified what it looks like when it's happening in the right way, would you encourage teachers to create projects that you could put in the hallways? Would you try to recreate an environment that demonstrated that creativity was being done? How would you begin to move the ball forward?
Well, it's about having a culture that's alive and growing rather than one which is inert and frozen. You can think of culture in several ways. I mean, one way of defining culture is the values and forms of behavior that you find in different social groups. A shorthand way of describing it is, as people often say, culture is the way we do things around here. And all schools have their own cultures. And you can see it in terms of habits and habitats. So the physical environment is one. If you go into a school that's got several hundred kids there, and there's no evidence of their output, their work, their vitality, their imagination in the walls or in the halls.
So output's important. Where do the products go, the projects?
Where you see them. That's right. And secondly, you see it in the kind of the behavior patterns of the school. Yes, in creative schools, there's a lot of interaction between different disciplines, people working on joint projects. There's group work going on. It's not all about group work, but you see the vitality of groups working together. There's a lot of collaboration between subjects, or disciplines I prefer to call them, but between teachers as well, and between teachers and students, and also across age groups. See, there are a lot of things we do in schools we take for granted, like we keep kids in separate age groups all the time. We divide the day into 40-minute bits and pieces. You don't have to do any of that. There's a lot of room for innovation within the culture of schools. So yes, when I speak to head teachers a lot, actually, I always say to them, question everything. Ask why you do it that way, and is there some better way of doing it which taps into people's creative energies?
Oh, well, that's great. And I just have to observe that we just came from a book signing where you've got a lot of people signed up, but as you're signing and engaging in a conversation, you would also put down a bass track in GarageBand, which is a content creation. And as you're talking, there are other people who are then adding music tracks onto your initial track.
Yeah.
If you're a principal walking by the room and you see there's a learned figure speaking one-to-one in a corner, and then over here there are people making really a lot of noise over the whole thing. Would you then look at that and go, this is where creativity is happening?
Well, some creative work requires silence and meditation. If you're sitting working on a poem, you don't necessarily want to be surrounded by a lot of other distractions. There's no real rule for this. The sign of creativity is the level of engagement, whether that's quiet or whether there's a lot of bustle going on. And in any activity, there may be phases of both. The whole thing about it is that being creative is about engaging your imagination and working not just with your own ideas, but bouncing off other people's ideas. And many of the algorithms of schooling, over time, have stultified that type of vitality. And I often say to people that one of the first steps in promoting creative education is to stop stopping it. Because people are naturally full of ideas if you just let them have them.
Right. And I think it's a great observation that it can be happening in silence.
Yes.
If you walk by the book signing, clearly everybody was engaged. And if the environment is silent, but everybody is engaged, and that's a creative environment too.
Yes. Right.
So is there any other general advice you would say to someone who wanted to make sure that creativity was happening in their classrooms or in their schools?
Well, I think the main point here is that everyone has great powers of imagination. They may not have evolved them or developed them, but they're there. And if you're interested in just efficiency, then that may require a certain type of management, a certain type of culture. But if innovation and creativity and engagement and learning are the things you're interested in, as we should be, then you need a different sort of culture for that. You need a culture of engagement. And I always think of schools like organisms. They're living communities, and they flourish under certain sorts of conditions. The role of a leader, whether it's a teacher or a head teacher, when promoting more creative engagement, is not to have all the ideas. That's not required. And some teachers get worried because they think, I've got to come up with all this creative stuff. Actually, your job is to encourage other people to have great ideas. From that point of view, the role of leadership in a creative school is not command and control, it's climate control. It's creating a climate of possibility. And like great gardens, if you create the right climate, the ideas will come. You can depend on it.
So if you're a site administrator or building principal, and you're in an environment which, for the most part, there's always creativity, is that stultified environment that you're trying to fight with your work.
It's there, you see. It's already there. It's about creating the conditions for it to grow. I'm actually working on a new book at the moment about how this works in schools. And when I talk about a revolution in education, it means reversing the model. A lot of national governments think they have to start by setting all these standards and getting other people to do them. And I think you start from the ground up. You encourage people to think more creatively about how they teach and how they learn, and you build up from there. So then there are implications for school leadership, then there are implications for school districts, then there are implications for state governments and federal governments. But as long as we recognize what we're trying to do is get things to happen at the ground level rather than force it down from the top, then you have a different model. That is a revolution.
So you have a teacher, you encourage creativity in your students. If you're a principal, you encourage creativity in your teaching.
Yes.
If you're a superintendent, you encourage creativity in your site administration.
Yes, because the real action of education is in the learning of the students. And if they're not learning, there's no education going on. Everybody has to be focused on that. And if they take their eye off the ball, then you get what we have. I've said this recently, that whether you're a teacher or a head teacher or administrator, leadership is about vision. Management is about organization. And you need both. Management without vision leads to bureaucracy. And leadership without organization leads to frustration. So you need both, but you have to get them in the right relationship. Otherwise, the whole thing becomes rather pointless and frustrating.
Well, we will look forward to that book. What's the title of the upcoming book?
We haven't yet got a title. That's our next creative task.
That's very good. We've been talking with Sir Ken Robinson, who's keynoted the Spring Q conference here in 2013. He just came from a book signing out of our minds with a very appreciative group. We hope we have a chance to see the book and catch the stream of your keynote, and of course, Sir Ken's great TED Talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you.